I've got a whole bunch of casseroles on the go. It's winter, so what better? Like I said, hot food, comfort food. So I'm going to make 5 of these big, large casseroles in a red clay, side handles, dome lid, little knob, big knob on the top. Easy to pick up because when it's hot, you don't want something small that you can drop. But anyway, trying to think what, and I'm going to try and do them in those 10 McCoos because I'm experimenting with 4 different 10 McCoos at the moment. But it's nasty outside today, so I'm just watching the waves. The tide is low at the moment, and it'll be high tide when it's dark. Okay, make sure when you actually put this down, there's no little gaps where you could trap some air underneath the ball, and make sure the bat is damp so that it actually doesn't slip off the bat. And if you got water underneath there, it would have just scooted right into my water pot there and spilt a whole pot of water everywhere. So you've got to make sure it's damp and not wet. And then centering, notice my elbow is actually right against that wall on the left so that I can actually put more pressure on the side, and then just coning it up a little bit just to make sure that it's even, because when you push it like this and you get really tall, and then when you start pushing it back down, it's a way of evening out the clay so that you can feel if there's any kind of imperfections in there, little loose bits or little hard pieces or an air bubble. And now when you're way down, you can actually, with your elbow locked in on the left, you can get it so that it will be completely centered. And it takes a lot of pressure because these are about 5 pounds of clay. And there's a ripple on the side. You can see it start to disappear now. That's the heel of my left hand pushing in there really hard so that the clay heals over and we don't have a little loose spot where you've got a ripple. And just make sure that it's totally centered so there is no wobble, because the bigger the piece you get, the more of a little wobble will turn into a big wobble. Now lots of water in there, and I'm putting my third finger over the top of my middle finger and pushing down because it gives a little extra pressure then. And I'm going to leave about 1.5 centimeters at the bottom so that I don't make it too thin, because the walls of a casserole, if it's going in the oven, should be even all the way across the bottom and up the side wall too. And not too far out, because these are going to have it's not a plate, it's basically, it needs a stable base, but it doesn't want to get too wide. Although, I guess that depends on, what design you're going to go for. These are like bean pots. And then working the clay from the outside edge of the wall there towards the center just helps recompress the base so that you end up with very little stress in the clay. After pushing it open, you're sort of pushing back to the center, and that evens the stress out on the floor. Usually 2 or 3 times doing that is enough. Now when you start doing a pull up the side wall, you want to make sure it's evenly wet inside and out so that you can actually not have to stop halfway up. There you go, I'm just reflattening that bottom. There was just a little bit of a curve, and I want to make sure it's fairly flat. Okay, evenly wet all the way up inside and out. Now 3 fingers are pressing on the outside, and the side of my middle finger on the left hand is actually flat against the wall so that I'm pushing against that with the clay in between. So I end up with no throwing rings pretty much. Now I'm going to wet the thing inside and out again so that it's evenly wet all the way up. And now I'm going to start the pull, dig in deep at the bottom, so you grab a piece of clay which you can then lift up with your middle finger, and it's pressing against those inside fingers again, and keep going right to the top. Compress the top rim with your finger there so that you can push the clay and make it a little thicker. It's nice to have that little extra thickness on one of these type of pots because you're going to have to put a flange in there. See, the water dribbles inside and out, so I can do now another pull, and it's a shaping pull this time, so that basically you'll get the form of your bean pot. And you're chasing that sweet wet spot just above your fingers, so one rotation you have to be that one finger width higher up so that you can actually keep that pull going on a wet spot rather than twice on the same level will mean the clay's drying under your fingertips. Now I'm going to have to push in a little bit like there at the top, because we've got a nice belly going, but we want to make sure that the top area goes in a little bit. Now this is definitely going to be where I push the belly out, and you have to judge the thickness here. You don't want to, if you feel like it's thin, you do not want to put too much pressure on that area down there. And a bean pot shouldn't be real thin anyway because it's going in the oven. And you know, that's a lot of stress on clay when you're heating it up and then cooling it down and heating it up, repetitive use. Now that's a nice curve. And I'm going to use the metal rib at this point just to get the water off, so we don't let it keep getting softer. We want it to actually stay this sort of denseness. The consistency is important, that it doesn't get too soft at this point because that belly can start to collapse. So we try and get all the water off that we possibly can. And now drag the sponge at the bottom all the way to the top so that you can actually make sure that you've got no dry spot and no slippery spot, so that your fingers will not suddenly speed up and slip on the inside when you do this next pull. And now remember, I want to put a flange in at the top, so I don't want it to get thin at the top edge, because I'm going to have to form that little gully that the lid is going to sit on. It's just refining at this point now because we've got the basic shape, and that's pushing out to make that little flange area so that the lid can just slot right in there. Now the edge of that little wooden rib is going to push in to kind of form a much more well-defined shelf for the lid to sit on. And we have a bean pot just about. Whenever you've got a piece like this, you know, you have to judge if you can still push a little bit further in the belly, or is it going to have to sit for half an hour to an hour to stiffen up a little bit. Because if you find there's any wobble appearing, that means that your clay is starting to sort of give way, and it's a good idea to set it aside. You've got bat pins holding the board down that it's on, so you can lift it off and put it back on the wheel. So don't be afraid to take it off and just put it back on in an hour's time and just do a little bit more. And the belly here I'm going to try and push out just a touch more, but I'm also dragging all the moisture off. A lot of people like to throw with a mirror opposite the clay, but I've always found I make that mirror so dirty that you can't really see the piece anyway. There's also things you can do, like push the edge of the rib in here just to actually redefine that shoulder, so that it gives you a little decorative element that you can work with. Just make sure there's no moisture left in. The idea is to let it firm up at this point, so you don't want to leave any moisture on the piece if you can help it. But that just slows down the drying. And they clean the bat up. You know, it's covered in water down there, so if you leave it on, it'll slow the process down a little bit, and you want it to dry, so get rid of any water you can that's down there. The more clay you can pull off with a rib at this point, the faster it will dry too. So check the lid again. I'm trying to make all these lids the same size. Okay, so we now need a lid which is basically a bowl, and you want to make sure that you don't thin the actual edge of this bowl that you're going to throw too much, because people will be putting it up and down on the pot. They could drop it down a little bit too hard at some point, so you don't want to make it too thin. But you're just throwing a small bowl. Now, I've thrown for a long time, going on 50 years now, so I often don't even need to use calipers. My eyes have been trained so well that over the years I can judge things by just looking. But it's better to not make it too big at first. You want to make sure you don't get too large before you measure with the calipers, because it's easier to make it a bit bigger, but it's really hard to push it back in. And that is just through experience. I remember about 30 odd years ago I was at a Robin Hopper workshop, and he was throwing lids, and he got them perfect every time. He said, "I don't need calipers. My eyes are my calipers." And it was beyond me at that point, but now I'm at that time in my life and I'm actually able to do it too. It's like muscle memory for people who learn how to play a guitar and stuff. Your eyes are just being trained. So don't get frustrated if you need to use calipers all the time, because it just takes a long time to learn that. And there's the cleaning of the bat. It's a good idea, just every time wipe all the clay off the bat. Get that clay completely in center here. We're going to be making some little knobs. There are so many ways you could make a knob, so you can play. And I've tried to make so many different styles over the years, but I love this one that looks like a small bowl sitting on top of the lid. But once again, don't make it too thin, because if you knock it, you don't want it to break easily. And it wasn't that simple. Miniature pot. And this is like a way of throwing, it's like throwing off the hump, basically. You just throw a pot, take it off, and then throw another one out of the same piece of clay. Okay, it's the following morning after I did the casseroles. They're all drying in the cupboard, and I'm going to put some handles on the sides of them this morning and put the knobs on the lids. So I've got this handle tool, which I got from Bill Wright Artisan Pottery Tools.com, and I'm going to try doing the handles with that. First thing I have to do is get the clay off this slab. So I'm just going to make sure I don't have any dirt on the table here. I've got to peel the plastic off, and then I measured this tool to the height of the actual clay. So I've rolled out the slab so it's exactly the height of that tool. So I should be able to get a fairly even handle each time. And measure over there, and I'm just going to dip it in water again because I know that works a bit better. And then you pull it through. It pulls that. We pull off that piece. It pulled it right off, and that's the handle I got from it. Perfectly nice strap handle there for the side of the casserole. Okay, I use a wooden stick on the lid to kind of make sure that I keep the handles right opposite each other. It's a nice way to, put your handle in and get it right there. But the first thing I've got to do is soften these down a little bit because they did actually dry a little faster than I thought here. It's actually already noon, and I usually come in at 9 in the morning. So I'm just going to soften those areas, but being a little firmer is not a big pain because I can actually score, obviously, and it won't press through and deform it a little bit by pressing on the handle. And it's not that dry, I can still put little fingerprints in, but I will actually do a little scoring on these ones. These tools are really useful. So I'm going to try and make the handle stop about there and curve down to this area there. Not sure what length. I've got the handles longer than I need. And I'm not going to score up there, but the handle will be touching all the way across that area. So I'll wet it across that area too. Now I'm going to grab two handles, cut them to the same length. That top one's a bit longer because I had two different balls of clay, remember, that I got the handles from. Take the extra off, and the handle is totally new clay, it's soft, doesn't need to be changed. Let's see if it's big enough, or is it too big? So I'm going to twist it as I go on there and kind of pull in with my thumb like that, so that my finger and thumb are twisting to make that handle form a curve that's kind of nice. I'll take this off for a second so you can see better. And we got the handle. I don't know, is that too big? Could be a bit smaller, I think, but I think it's gone higher up than I thought. But of course I could just do that, squash it down to that thing there. That's not too bad now. Then I'm going to use my thumb. Okay, so put the handle back on, the stick back on. I'm going to try and get the other one in the same place. Give it a little moisture across there. And then we're going to do the same again. I'm going to place it, look at it to make sure it's even. Thumb pulling down to get it nice and even. Take the stick off. Maybe this is a bit big, I don't know. But you know, you've got a hot 400 degree, 350, whatever you bake at, roast at pot coming out of the oven. You want to make sure that you've got a nice firm grip on it. And now it's going to be just smoothed in like that. These nylon paintbrushes are terrific in the studio for pottery. I don't like the stiff hog hair brushes, they leave too much roughness on the clay as you're using them. But these are just meant for acrylic painting, I guess. Just kind of blending it in so it looks like it's growing out of the form. I think of these as like a soup tureen that you would make soup in the oven, or a bean pot. around here it seems like a lot of people like beans. Now I want to make sure this height is good. Yep, this looks perfect. Let's see. I could have gone for the slightly smaller size handle possibly. I think that it's sticking out a long way, but once again, I'm just saying, you know, want to make sure you pick this thing up securely. And another thing, if you want to put your finger there and just curve up like that, you can make that handle come up a little bit. A bit easier to get your fingers underneath there. So now it's sort of going up like that, and this one is flat. So we'll do the same to this one. Put your finger, or that finger. So you've got a little bit more length underneath there to lift your fingers in there to actually get the piece lifted up. And then take a look again. That one is a touch higher than the other one, so I'm just going to go like that. That looks better now. All right, so that's the handles. Okay, the lid is leather hard almost, so it's let's see, the trimmings are flying off. It's not so sticky, so I'm going to trim this off and have to wet it down a little bit. Remember, I left a little thickness where I'm going to join it. And then using our little scoring tool, okay, so it's a bit wet at the moment, so I'm just going to give it a final little score, because if you put too much water it makes this slippery and it doesn't adhere very quickly. And remember, we threw all of these little knobs, so the bottom of these is still pretty soft. Just going to give it a little scoring just to roughen it a touch, and then add this. Now that will make it slip and slide around like crazy, so I've got to get that to soak in a little quickly. And what I usually do is, we got a little circle there, and I'm going to make a couple of circles in here, so I can make sure I get it centered. Go around. I think that's pretty close. And then just wiggling with my finger to get it to adhere a little bit. It's got a slight tilt to one side, so I'm bending over. I can probably knock that just with my finger like that and knock it straight. And then just take your brush with a little bit of water on it, gather up all your mess, scrape it off. The brush is acting like a finger, but it's slipperier. You can use the ferrule of the brush right against the piece of clay now. The water's soaked in. The kind of friction of the motion here is actually making the water soak in, and then I'm pulling it out just to get that water away from there. And you know, I can just wet the top a little bit there. And then use my finger again just to make sure, because it's slippery up there now, that this is straight. And that is. Okay, immediately, this is 1 minute later, I just dropped it in there to see if it would fit, and it fits perfect. So that's nice when that happens. And that is a still fairly soft casserole soup bean pot that now has to dry a little slowly. I'll cut through the bottom there. Remember this harp that I use? Somebody should make these in North America. I know I got this from England, because it's so easy to push through something like that and then pull it back. And you can do that 2 or 3 times. It's so easy. And there's the tension's on the guitar strings, so you know you've got a really thin cut. You barely lose anything on the bat when you cut through with one of these. So there you go. Somebody get hold of a blacksmith or somebody who can bend a rod into, you know, basically a rectangle, and then pull a guitar string across, and that's a really useful tool. This is the day after that storm I was filming in the other day when I was doing casseroles. So the waves, even 24, 36 hours later, are still crashing in here. And the beach is even more damaged than it was last time. So we've had 3 big storms that are mostly wind and high storm surges. So, but it's pretty. And that's the wind damage from the actual, these trees were just snapped off when the water surged over this actual path that we usually walk along. Those waves were rocking up all over these rocks here and literally snapped everything off, blew it into the path here, and then washed it all the way across here. The power of nature. Okay, I've got 5 of these now, and they've been drying overnight. I do that little piece of paper under the lid there, just in case there's a little tightening up of in the shrinkage. But it just came out quite easily, and I can get rid of the paper now because the clay is not in the least sticky anyway. But I've always done that, and it means that if it's a little tight, you can just lift with the pieces of paper, and it usually comes out at that point. But this lid's just right. So now I'm just going to do some carving on them, just for decoration, using a little loop tool, another little loop tool, and I got my fluting, faceting, whatever you want to call that, which this one kind of needs to be replaced. It's getting a little worn, but so we'll put you on stop motion so I can do all of these. Okay, I just tried trimming this lid because I think they're pretty close to ready now, and it is. So I'll trim the rest of the pieces. So when I'm trimming and I've done this fluting kind of carving, I like to define the edge of it by going down a little bit into the clay. And I couldn't reach at the very bottom there because the grips of the gifting grip were in the way. So I have to release it, and then I can actually just define that lower edge of the carving. It just gives it a really nice punchy edge. And I trimmed up into the hand, the knob area a little bit there to define that knob a little bit more too. The body of the jar is quite firm at the top, but the bottom still feels a little soft. I think I'm just going to try it. I've got the arms, I could actually grip this if I was a little bit insecure, but I think it should be fine. Because it's quite heavy, you can see better on this side. So a casserole is going to go into the oven. You've got to try to keep the walls fairly even thickness all over the jar, because if one part heats up more than another, you can get thermal shock issues. And you know, you're trying to get the heat to distribute evenly. So I'm not going to make this super thin in the belly area down there. I'm just going to try and take some off so it's not super heavy either. These were thrown with 5 pounds of clay, if I remember right. I'm just going to let that taper off here. Now there's a carving that goes, oh, that's way down there. So the handle here, I'm going to do some chattering. I'm just going to draw a line here where I'll stop the chattering. There we go, and I won't, let's put a nice foot on here. Oh, actually I've got my foot tool to do that. This is from Bill Wright, artisanpotterytools.com, and I'm just going to put myself a nice rounded foot tool edge right there. Oh wow, look at that one. That's nice. This bit I'm going to trim off. Let's see if I can use this one again. I like this little, this is a little loop tool I got from somewhere. I like this one. But it can actually move along the piece sometimes when you least expect it, so you've got to be careful with it. That's a nice foot. Nice foot. And the bottom, I will probably not glaze the bottom of these. So I'm just going to smooth it. I would normally put a nice little foot in there, but I'm not going to thin it too much on the bottom because I want to make sure you've got some nice solid thickness, you know, fairly even all the way down here and then across the bottom. I don't want it thin in that area there either. And let's choose a chattering tool. I'm going to do a defined edge here and a defined edge there, and then do something in between. Instant started chattering. See what we have there. That's quite nice. You can't stop these tools chattering, they just want to chatter. As you saw from parts of this beginning of the video, we're having horrific storms this year, and wind and high surges, storm surges. So I'm really beginning to think that my studio is basically under threat here. And so I'm going to look into building myself a studio up on the hill behind my house. It's just, this building's only 3 feet above. It's been here 120 odd years, but basically the sea level's rising, and I've basically touched the water. When the waves went under my building in one storm in 2015, I could touch the water. And the storm's recently been coming late at night and it's too dark, so I don't want to try going over the deck in the dark. But anyway, let's get on with this a little bit. See if it works. I'm going to try and create what I call a wave in the chattering by doing it at an angle. This wave thing's a little hard to do. That's why I didn't put the arms on this, because I didn't want to catch the arm as I'm going down. Now I'm going to try and create another little edge. There you go, nice edge. Let's see what we did. Oh, there you go. I call that a wave because it's kind of at a diagonal. And I like that. And then I we'll define that edge one more time here. Yeah, so I couldn't beat this studio. This is just the most amazing studio here, but it's really looking more and more with all the damage. You looked at that beach. I mean, the sea is just coming up way up over the edge of the beaches into the land, and I'm a little protected here being inside a little bay, but the storm surges were, and I get some pretty decent looking waves coming here too. And the building shook the other day, so there you go. I lost 2 pieces that were outside that I got hanging my bird feeders. All right, this looks nice. Let's undo that a little bit. Let you get a closer look here. Just a nice little edge to that. And we put the jar there. Then we put the lid on top. Make sure there's no debris on the edge. And it fits just right. That'll be a nice lid. I will fire this with the lid on too. I'll end up waxing that inside area. And I'll hit it with a rubber mallet. I usually use, because I think it's the pitch of the knock that you actually hit these pieces, and it creates a certain pitch that releases any little bit of fluxing between the lid and the jar, and that's why I like to use a metal one, but somebody said I should use a rubber one. I'm not sure it's the amount of pressure that you hit, it's more about the sharpness and the pitch that separates the 2 pieces, but we'll try. Anyway, that looks pretty nice. So that's 1. I got another 5 to do. No, got another 4 to do. When I'm sharpening, I have this tool, which I got from the hardware store, and this one you just pull it along what you're trying to sharpen. It pulls a thin sliver of metal off. And then the other tools, I got this sharp grinding kind of hand grinding stone. You can just do that. I'm not feeling it sharp yet. That's a bit sharper. And then there's a fine version of it. I've got clay all over these. So this is take a bit longer to do because it's a finer one, but it'll give you probably a nicer, sharper edge. Yep, that's sharp now. So let's see what it does. So I'm trying to keep that angle as I go down. And then I'm going to stop there because that's where the other tool made its mark. So what did that one do? And that's what I call a wave. It's at a diagonal going across the piece. And now I'm going to define the edges again. I think I can make this one a bit bigger. That's where it's the thinnest, so I don't want to go too much there either. I might be create a score line. Do one a bit lower below that one too. Okay, looks pretty good. Good idea just to brush off
The rest, I've got another 3 to do, but I'll just put those on stop motion.